that says #1 son on the license plate. I'm gonna make you proud, Daddy.
You make your daddy proud.
I'm gonna make you so proud.
You make your daddy proud.
You're gonna be so proud.
Proud?
Proud.
Well, the boy's grown up.
That leads very nicely to these charges with Hunter Biden, and I just want to, I've asked this of a number of people, but you're the person who I very much wanted to ask, what's actually at play here, right? I want to give you the floor because you're one of the world's experts, and I think that nobody maybe understands what's happening on the chessboard in like the 4-dimensional level here more than you. Many have come on this program this week and have pounded their fists on the desk and have said, no, they're covering up for the FARA violations, and that's what we really need to get a special counsel appointed to go after the Bidens for. I'd like to give you the floor, Mike, to maybe like explain like you would to a 3-year-old why that won't ever happen, or maybe why it should, and what the true game was at play there, and why why that nugget specifically in Ukraine, but also around the world in China and Tajikistan and Kazakhstan and Russia, like why that is an untouchable for the blob.
I'm really glad you actually started with that question of what's at stake here, because a lot of people see the stakeholders emerging. You know, they see the CIA blocking the DOJ's questioning of the guy who paid Hunter Biden's taxes. I've talked many times. Hunter Biden was on the chairman's advisory board of NDI, the National Democratic Institute, which is the DNC branch of the National Endowment for Democracy, which was created in a letter from the CIA director. I mean, it's the most prolific CIA cutout in the CIA's whole arsenal. Hunter Biden was on the chairman's advisory board of it. As you mentioned, Cofer Black and all that. So people are seeing the stakeholders in it, but understanding the stakes of it helps understand the magnitude. So, how long would it take you to count to 75 trillion? that maybe is a good opening question. Russia sits on $75 trillion of natural resources. I was actually extremely relieved this week when I saw Lindsey Graham mention finally that the reason that we're in Ukraine is because they've got all the natural resources, dummy. You know, it was like, after all this time lying to us, lying. Oh, we're in Ukraine for democracy, but they don't hold elections. We're in Ukraine for democracy, but they banned any other media outlet except the state media. We're in Ukraine for democracy. Oh, they banned alternate religions. We're in there for the democracy. You know, they're rounding people up to drag them out of their homes when they're crippled, to put them on the front lines. It's they're less democratic than Saudi Arabia, and yet but as that excuse is wearing thin, finally cards are starting to be revealed, where finally they're saying, okay, listen, we're in it for the money, okay, man, just don't. I know we should have started with this all along, but we didn't know. We didn't really. You can see why we didn't, but but what's really interesting too about that is, this. Well, let's start with the stakes. So Graham cited the $12.4 trillion that's sort of the stipulated figure for the total amount of oil, gas, titanium, iron ore, and lithium, and there's a few other critical minerals and rare earths, plus all the oil and gas in Ukraine. And mind you, this is also, we're talking this the week that Saudi Arabia just said it's not going, renewing its petrodollar agreement for the past 50 years. But that's 12 trillion in Ukraine. And then you've got the Eurasian landmass has most of the world's natural resources. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen the video of General Laura Richardson effectively ovulating, talking about all the natural resources in Venezuela. Have you ever seen a 4-star general talk about natural resources? If you've ever questioned what true love really looks like, you should see someone from our Joint Chiefs of Staff or a four-star general talk about a foreign country's natural resources. Find someone who looks at you the way one of our four stars looks at natural resources in a foreign country. and that is, and you have to understand, when our foreign policy establishment puts its eyes on that loot, it's the corporations and financial firms that are going to grab that up, and those individuals are going to get their careers made with those institutions that they're really serving. Smedley Butler talked about this in 1936 when he wrote War is a Racket. And one of the opening lines is, in 1914 I made Mexico safe for Standard Oil, and goes through all the different countries that even back then, over 100 years ago, our U.S. military was doing. And now that is, as we didn't even have an empire back then. At that time, all we had was Cuba and the Philippines. We didn't have, half of South America, most of Central Asia, most of Central and Eastern Europe. And so that game has multiplied 1,000-fold. And there is an in-process plan. There has been an in-process plan to seize Eurasia. Eurasia is that there's something called the Mackinder hypothesis, which was he who controls Eurasia controls the world. This idea that it's the great island that stretches essentially from Siberia into essentially the sort of Middle East, North Africa region, and scoops through Central and Eastern Europe. And that region is home to something like 70% of the world's hydrocarbons, over half of the world's rare earths and natural and precious metals. And so territorial control of that gives you commercial profit from all of that. But military buffers essentially prevent territorial accession. So do things like coups. Now, when we won the Cold War in 1991, that was the moment that our foreign policy establishment thinks of 1991 through 2006 essentially as being the end of history, the world hegemonic moment of the American empire, as we had no opposition from Russia. China was not economically powerful enough at that point to be able to fund other countries to rebuff us, and we were acquiring one by one all of these Eurasian states and turning them into client states. Everything from Central and Eastern Europe into the Caspian, the Black Sea, Persian Gulf, all of these countries we were basically taking control of politically. And then when Vladimir Putin rose to power, he effectively weaponized Russia's economic soft power over Central and Eastern Europe through gas diplomacy, because 100% of Europe's gas came from Russia at that time. Before the State Department, once Russia threatened Georgia and a bunch of these other Central and Eastern European countries threatened to cut off their gas, and actually did cut off their gas several times, forcing those countries' political leadership to then do favors for the Russian state in order to turn the gas back on. The U.S. State Department embarked on a program of what they called energy diversification or energy diplomacy. So this, again, is a State Department operation in Ukraine, in Central and Eastern Europe, that has been going on for now 20 years. And mind you, the State Department is the big boss of the CIA. The CIA's job is to provide covert, plausibly deniable support for the State Department. Remember, the CIA only exists because the State Department wants to do something, but it would get in too much trouble because it's dirty. So they want a spy agency to do it and not have government fingerprints on it. If it was above board, the State Department would just do it itself. So again, and it was Tony Blinken, who the current head of the State Department, who organized the CIA letter to stop the Hunter Biden, laptop leak. Again, I can't stress that enough. But the reason that they are gunning for Trump, it's my belief, and this is personal opinion, that they don't really, the forces that we're talking about here, the truly dangerous ones, the ones that are actually running this country, they can give a little on domestic tax policy. They can give a little on wokeness. They can give a little on any number of purely domestic culture war issues. but you touch the money, you touch the Seize Eurasia blueprint. It's like a hyena trying to take a carcass from a male lion. You know, you are sparking a gang war at that point, and a very hungry animal is going to see you as the next carcass if you try that. And Trump's policy, if you remember, he didn't just knock out, you know, the Clinton dynasty, he knocked out the Bush dynasty, and in doing so, he called Iraq a big fat mistake, Jeb a big fat mess, got us out of Syria, and actually said, honestly, we're in Syria, but we're taking the oil. Kind of like what Lindsey Graham finally said 2.5 years into this war. But again, this war has been raging for a long time because the CIA had been working. Again, there was an in-process CIA operation to seize the eastern part of Ukraine since 2014, when the CIA orchestrated the coup to overthrow the government which is when the breakaway state in Ukraine, the Donbass, even broke away. The CIA started this. The State Department started this. Victoria Nuland at the State Department. And then the CIA-backed right sector mobs who January 6th, effectively the democratically elected president of Ukraine out of office. So then we lost eastern Ukraine. We wanted to take it all back because that's where the money is. That's where the minerals are. That's where the rare earths are. That's where the precious metals are. That's where the oil and gas are. That's where all of the contracts that Burisma had for their mining rights, for their extraction rights, were in the Donbass or in the Black Sea Crimea region. Both of those territories were taken effectively by a Russia-backed, rebel faction, essentially the eastern part of Ukraine. So the CIA took over Ukraine's intelligence state, that article that you read at the top of this, in 2014, in order to militarily reacquire that territory. But I don't think Trump was actually read into all of this. If you remember when Trump took office, right in 2016, there was a flurry of Brookings institutions and Atlantic Council and the Atlantic, all these publications about whether or not the national security state should really tell Donald Trump all of the state secrets. Maybe we need to hide the ball a little bit. Now, I think they drastically understated it in that tone. If you remember, we know that they lied to Trump about troop movements in Syria, and we had generals come out and say, well, we told them one thing about what was happening in Lebanon or Syria, but we actually we were constantly playing shell games, I think was the quote. If you look up that quote about what our own generals were doing to mislead Trump, and I think the same thing was happening in Ukraine. I think they basically said this is kind of a need to know thing. This is all written. Now remind, like, the CIA is not all powerful. They win some, they lose some. They only have a certain amount of funding to be able to pull things off. So if they need to budget things, they've got scarce resources. They were not doing well in Ukraine when Trump got into office. If Trump then it pulled the plug on it, you have an incredibly high stakes, again, trillions of dollars of stakeholder loot at stake already in process. If Trump takes any action against this, it knocks over the whole Jenga tower. And this is, again, why they did the impeachment. But there's a lot more there, but I've been going on for a while, so I'll pause.
I mean, this is so educational. Two important follow-up questions. One, it seems suicidal. Eurasia's really far away. And the goal then would be what? Breaking up Russia? The goal would then be, presumably you'd have to, you'd need to then go to war with Russia and then conquer Russia? Is that the end result here?
Oh, yeah, you can read Michael McFaul's. Michael McFaul's probably written, a sort of Jane Austen-sized novel on how you can break up Russia to achieve this. Michael McFaul was the U.S. ambassador to Russia under the Obama administration, and is currently the head of the Freeman Spogli Institute at Stanford, which houses the Stanford Internet Observatory, which was the place that effectively censored and effectively rigged the 2020 election. They were the ones who got, by their own math, tens of millions of tweets labeled misinformation, anything that questioned mail-in ballots. All of that stuff was under Michael McFaul. Michael McFaul, so again, people look at that like mail-in ballots. It's a domestic issue. No, this is coming from Michael McFaul, who was, the U.S. ambassador to Russia. And the U.S. ambassador is the State Department head of the region. They're the quarterback of the CIA activity in the region. You can read, Richard Bloom's Killing Hope, and you'll read in the first chapter about how the thing the CIA fears most is not Russian spies. It's the U.S. ambassador in the region, because that's who makes or breaks an operation. So you got the guy who was quarterbacking the CIA's activities for Eurasia and Russia, and he's the one who's effectively controlling the institution that was the reason that all of us got kicked off of social media in 2020 for talking about mail-in ballots, because they wanted to pre-rig it for Joe Biden to continue the Seize Eurasia grand plan. But yes, they do want to break up Russia. They've already drawn up maps about how it can be split in 6 or 7 ways by ethnically balkanizing it, the same way they did to Yugoslavia. They take all the different regions, they sort of group it by the different factions on sort of ethnic grounds and on sort of religious grounds, and then they effectively could partition it that way. The other way is if they could simply regime change it by finding a Boris Yeltsin type puppet figure. This was the role that they had groomed for Alexei Navalny. Alexei Navalny, who was polling at less than 2% of the votes. Alexei Navalny, who made the prank phone calls about the attacks on him with Bellingcat, who's funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, which was Hunter Biden's outfit, the CIA cutout. Alexei Navalny, who was groomed at the Yale Jackson School of Global Policy. That is, he was recruited to come basically train at the Yale Jackson School to do peaceful protests in Russia. The Yale Jackson School gets its name from the guy who Bill Clinton nominated to be CIA director in the 1990s. The whole thing, if we can get a compliant CIA puppet to run Russia with an iron friggin' fist, then you can preserve Russia without balkanizing. But those are basically the two choices: regime change in a CIA coup, or balkanizing it Yugoslavia style.
Russia has most of the world's nuclear weapons. This seems suicidal, by definition.
Yes, well, it's also worth noting that they have most of the world's natural resources. And when I mentioned that Russia has $75 trillion of natural resources, the U.S. only has $45 trillion of gross exploitable natural resources. So, even though we've got 3 times Russia's population, 20 times its GDP, John McCain was fond of saying, they're a gas station with a military. Well, they're such a big gas station that they actually have almost twice as much natural resources as we do, and that's just Russia, let alone all the Russia adjacent sort of Eurasian satellite regions. Your Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Ukraine, the whole sort of Central Asia, Eastern Europe rim. And so, if we can just break them, economically, break them militarily, it's all ours. And then along comes a guy who's edgily shit posting on Twitter, and the American people love him. And damn it, we have a constitution that makes him commander in chief. That can't be right. That would screw up our plans. And we're living in the aftermath of that, that cognitive dissonance between the will of the people and the will of the blob.